I have to be honest with you that this morning when I woke up, which granted is 6 hours ahead of you, I made the mistake of checking in my news feed, which I get from the BBC, and a headline came into my sphere and said, from Israel, from Palestine, we are at war. And I was so shaken, and I thought to myself, oh, how can I lead a service today when this is going on in our world? And how can our time together and the words that we share make any possible kind of difference? And who am I to be speaking at such a time as this, with all the pains and the trials and the tribulations that are going on? And I'm sure I'm not alone if I say to you, and I'm sure you resonate with me, you feel so powerless and so weak and ineffectual. But then I looked over my notes and I thought, no, actually, it's perfect. Because what I hope to bring to you today, and I can only tip my hat to Parker Palmer, and that is, these are not my words. These, of course, are mostly based in his, but his truths, I think, resonate even at such a painful and terrifying and confronting time as this. I hope you might agree with me. For those of you who don't know Parker Palmer, or Parker J. Palmer, he is a writer, educator, he's a small group facilitator, and an activist whose focus is community and community leadership, spirituality, and social change. As a teacher, and of course I resonate with that because I myself am a teacher, and I know that many of us amongst our community are also teachers, or friends, partners with, daughters of friends of teachers. But he, as a teacher, he has written prolifically on the art of teaching and how a teacher can turn up in their true selves and make profound differences, not only in the lives of their students, but also in their lives, the reciprocity of being true to oneself in the teaching space. And I highly, 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 highly recommend his books if you haven't touched any of them. I'll probably mention 4 titles, but in terms of his teaching, there's 2 seminal ones that he's written. One is called The Courage to Teach, and the other one is The Heart of Higher Education. And it's amazing reading because, of course, it's blending his deep sense of spirituality with the very craft and the science of teaching. Another very powerful book, and some of what we'll talk about today, is in one of my favorites called Let Your Life Speak. I think the title says it all. And as a Quaker, Dr. Palmer shares much on the importance of the power of silence. And my absolute favorite of his books, so I'm going to be drawing a lot on that today, is from A Hidden Wholeness. And when we finish today, if I forget to mention about the circles of trust, somebody please remind me. But A Hidden Wholeness is a very, very, very powerful work. And out of it came an amazing modality that I wanted to touch upon at the very end. And at the beginning of the book, he quotes that great sage, Leonard Cohen, who I'm sure most of us love and adore, with these words: "The blizzard of the world has crossed the threshold, and it has overturned the order of the soul." Parker Palmer, in this book, in the beginning, talks about the practice of the farmers in the Great Plains of America, who during the winter, at the first sign of a blizzard would run a rope from the back door of the house to the barn. And you may well ask, but why? And it's because they themselves knew from the stories of people who even on their own properties had lost their lives because they'd lost sight of their home in the whiteout of the blizzard and frozen to death, if you can believe it, right there on their own property while they're trying to find their way back to their homes. And it's a powerful metaphor that Palmer picks up, because he says today that we live in a blizzard of another sort. It swirls around us as economic justice, ecological ruin, physical and spiritual violence. It swells within us as fear and frenzy, greed and deceit, and sometimes indifference to the sufferings of others. And we all know stories of people who've wandered off into this madness and have been separated in a way from their own souls, losing their moral beings. So it's easy to believe that words such as Leonard Cohen's, that the blizzard of the world can overturn the order of the soul. And by soul, he means, of course, that life-giving core of us, of the human self, with its hunger for truth and justice and love and forgiveness. But it's important to note that Palmer does not believe that souls can be destroyed, even by blizzards. It may be obscured. We may forget, we may deny that its guidance is close at hand. And yet we are still and always will be in the soul's backyard with the chance after chance to grab hold of that rope, find our way back home and regain our bearings. And when we catch sight of our souls, we can become healers in a wounded world, and in our families, and in our neighborhoods, and in the workplace. And as we are called back to what he calls our hidden wholeness amid the violence of the storm, we're guided home by the flickering light in the kitchen of our soul. And most importantly, and it's something which we'll touch upon in a moment, but Parker says, yes, this is a private journey, it's a solitary journey of the soul, but also it's something that we can't do alone, at least not for long. We need trustworthy relationships and tenacious communities of support. And because, as he notes, we do have capacity for self-delusion, and I throw my hat in the ring here, and we endeavor, and we will sometimes get lost on the route without correctives from outside of ourselves. So the question is, what is the soul? Well, it's many things, of course, but its essence, as Ernest Holmes said, is that place deep within us, beyond the chatter, the inner and the outer chatter, the place that in silent magnitude knows and knows that it knows, to quote Ernest Holmes. This week I've been reminded very powerfully by one of my students who is Muslim. We had a very, very interesting conversation, he and I, about the importance of the cave. And for him, I won't go into the story of it now because we don't have time, but he was talking about how the cave is for the Muslims a sacred place. It's a place not only of where we go to find that compass, that social bearing, that's a soul bearing, that place that knows. But it is also, of course, for Muslims where Muhammad heard from Allah and was commanded to recite. And of course, for Christians and Jews too, it's in the Book of Kings. And as we know, it's that story where Elijah goes into the cave. And this is the reason that I wanted to share this particular thing, because of course, Elijah is feeling very much how I was feeling this morning. He runs to the sanctity of a cave. And this is what he says, and I quote from the New King James, actually. Lord God, all powerful, I have always served you as well as I could. But the people have broken their agreement with you, destroyed your altars, killed your prophets. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. So, of course, what he's talking about in his own, obviously, context is the same things that I was grappling with this morning, looking at thinking, I'm trying to do my best, and what does it mean? Because just the world sometimes feels like it's falling apart around me, and what on earth can I do? And as we know the story, he says, go to the front of the cave and I will pass by you. And as the story goes, a very strong wind came, and it says, until it caused the mountains to fall apart and the large rocks to break in front of him. But, as the story recounts, God was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake. And it says, God was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire. And as the book says, God was not in the fire either. And after the fire, there was, and I quote, a quiet, gentle sound. And when Elijah heard it, he covered his face and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. And it was there that he received the directive, a specific directive on where to go, what to do, the specifics of his next step. And I feel very powerfully that that is really what the point of going inside and getting past all the chatter, the inner and the outer, accessing the soul, is that it's there one can really, really hear what the soul wants and what the soul is guiding us to do next, our next step. As Parker Palmer says, that the bad news is that violence is found at every level of our lives. But the good news is, and of course he being a Quaker is very, very, very much committed to nonviolence at every level. And he asks, what does it mean to act nonviolently? Well, the answer, of course, depends on the situation, and 1,000 situations might yield 1,000 different answers. Yet running through all of these answers, you will find what he calls the habit of the heart. In other words, to be in the world nonviolently means learning to hold the tension of opposites, trusting that the tension itself will, and I quote him directly, pull our hearts and minds open to a third way of thinking and acting. We must, he says, learn to hold the tension between the reality of the moment and the possibility that something better might emerge. Of course, finding a third way beyond all of our current dilemmas may feel like it's only possible in theory, and probably sometimes it feels unlikely in life. In a world at war, of course, peace is our dream, but the grim realities of greed, fear, hatred, and doomsday news, like what I read this morning, quickly feel like they can turn that dream into a delusion. Well, let me quote a piece from his book that answers this question. And this is what he says: the insight at the heart of nonviolence is that we live in what he calls a tragic gap. A gap between the way things are and the way we know they could and should and might be. It's a gap that has never been and never will be closed. And if we want to live a non-violent life, we must learn to stand in that tragic gap, as he calls it, faithfully holding the tension between reality and possibility. In one of his postings online, he has a beautiful website, which I would encourage you to read. He talks about how in the days earlier on in his marriage, when his mother was in need of care, they decided to put her in a retirement village. And the retirement village said, for an extra price, we can do things to make her life more comfortable. And they made an agreement that, you know what, it's worth the extra money, we'll do it. And then he said later on in life, after his parents had passed and they'd been married for many, many years, he began to notice that the dynamic in their relationship was that the temptation was, if either of them hit a snag in the road or a problem or a grappling with something, the temptation was to give each other advice. And so the joke between them was, let's not do as we did for our mother. Let's not pay for extra services. Let's just pay a little extra, a little less extra this month. In other words, let's not give each other advice. And if you're familiar with one of my favorite, it went viral many, many years ago, and if you're familiar with it, but there's a thing written by a former journalist of the Chicago Tribune called "To the Class of '97, Wear Sunscreen." If you're not familiar with it, please Google it afterwards. And even she says, my advice has no basis more reliable than my own meandering experience, but I will dispense this advice now. And the key word here, I think, is dispense. Because often we offer advice like we're dispensing medicine. It will, we're convinced, make the other person better. And Parker Palmer talks about a friend who had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. And a concerned friend visited him and said to him, "Hey, how are you feeling after getting this news?" And this man said, "Well, actually, I'm feeling a sense of peace." "Well," says the friend, "I urge you to get a second opinion. And while you're doing that, there's an amazing book that you must read, and also a meditation class that I know and I'm convinced will help you ride through this." And then allegedly, a relative then contacted this man later and said, "Go to church before it's too late." This advice understandably troubled the man, and he ended up calling Parker Palmer to talk about it. And Parker said in his writings, he thought that perhaps the friend or the concerned friend that had gone over to talk to him, perhaps it might have been better if when he'd first heard him say, "I feel peace," say to him, "How great, tell me more." Parker asked this man, who was now really troubled, were there any other feelings that he'd had apart from peace? And he said, "Well, actually, I've also been feeling a little afraid sometimes." And so Parker said, "Tell me more." And he talked while Parker listened, and he asked a few more open questions. And then when they were done, he said, "Actually, now I feel a measure of peace again. I feel like peace has returned." And Parker said that, and this is the important thing, it was a peace that had come from within him, not from anything that Parker had said. That he'd been there to help in a way just clear some of the rubble that blocked access to his own soul. So here's the deal. And this is the essence of some of Parker Palmer's teaching, is that the human soul doesn't want to be advised or fixed or saved. It simply wants to be witnessed, to be seen and heard and accompanied exactly the way it is. When we make that kind of deep bow to the soul of a suffering person, our respect reinforces the soul's healing resources, and those are the only resources that can help them through. Many of us helper types feel that we're doing a good thing by trying to help, but in fact, the greatest help is just being present. For those of you who are familiar with his writings and his book, you will know that he has suffered acutely over the years from clinical depression. And in a way, I think that's another reason, apart from his teaching background, the fact that he too, like me and like others like me, have grappled with depression over the years. And when he was in a particularly bad way, he said there was one friend called Bill who came to his house every day around 4 o'clock, would sit him down in his easy boy chair and just massage his feet. Parker Palmer said, he rarely said a word to me, but somehow he found the one place in my body where I could feel a sense of connection with another person. And it relieved my awful sense of isolation while he bore witness, silent witness, to my condition. He said, by offering me this quiet companionship for a couple of months, day in and day out, Bill saved my life. He was unafraid to accompany me in my suffering, and he made me less afraid of myself. He was present, simply and fully present. And in those moments when we are present to another, we have no fix or no save to those who are suffering. I love the Mary Oliver quote. Let me share this. This is the first and wildest and wisest thing I know, that the soul exists, and it is built entirely out of attentiveness. So I'm going to leave you with 3 pieces of advice, if you'll excuse the self-contradiction. But it's not my advice, it's Parker's. Number 1, he says, don't give advice unless someone insists. Instead, just be fully present and ask the kind of questions that give another a chance to express his or her own truth, more of his or her own truth, whatever it may be. And number 2, he says, if you find yourself receiving unwanted advice from someone close to you, smile and politely say, can I pay you a little extra this month? A little less extra this month? And the 3rd, well, it's this, Parker Palmer's wonderful revelation. We need, he said, a coat with 2 pockets. In one pocket, there's dust, and in the other pocket, there's gold. We need a coat with 2 pockets to remind us who we are. Thank you.
If you like this video, please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click on the bell to be notified whenever we post a new video. Thank you.